Our organizers acknowledge that placing white evangelical in parentheses signals that the work that we're doing is in spaces that have been historically white and evangelical. Let's pause to consider what historically white means. Historically white based on exclusion. It's not a natural state of affairs, even if it's pretty common and seemingly dominant. By contrast, historically Black colleges emerged as an option for Blacks in response to this exclusion. We need to confess that we have conformed to this world in a way that has made a home for historically white institutions that promote whiteness. Do we need to understand and confess that our conformity has resulted in a deformed maturity, as Dr. Willie Jennings so eloquently illustrated in his talk? Can white people be saved? Reflections on the relationship of missions and whiteness. To quote, Dr. Jennings said, to speak of whiteness is not to speak of a particular people, but of people caught up in a deformed building project aimed at bringing the world to its full maturity. No one is born white. It's a formation and a process of maturing that destroys. His insights about this being formed in terms of the ground and in the spaces and the places we occupy was quite profound. And the maturity whiteness aims at always forms segregated spaces. It forms lives in parallel, whether separated by miles or inches. He argues that we need to overcome this by reconfiguring life geographically, so that all life flows differently, the flows of money and education. So I would build on Jennings and say we need to create new spaces that we develop together, where no perspective or cultural value is privileged over another. No one position is considered superior to the other. So I would agree, I have some issues with navigating white evangelical spaces as some of the things that have been described already. But we need to subvert white evangelicalism. And what does that mean? We need to undermine the power and authority of whiteness as a lens. The power and authority of whiteness as a lens. And have Christ to be our center and have the power and authority of God reign in this seminary and in evangelical places so that we can be active, more fully active and constructive agents in the God's redemptive action. Beverly Tatum, who happens to be a clinical psychologist and the president of Spelman College and also author of the book, Why Are the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? She was interviewed and asked, the question is not, are you racist? But are you actively working against the system of advantage? Active racism, we know what that is, name-calling, active discrimination. But there's a lot of behavior that we engage in that supports a system of advantage. I would elaborate this by noting that the system of advantage includes a perspective that certain culturally entrenched ways of viewing the world, certain ways of studying theology, psychology, and mission, certain ways of leading, communicating, managing conflict, etc., are superior. Now, by contrast, a colorblind position is a common heritage, and sometimes as Christians we feel we've arrived if we have a colorblind perspective that would include not attending to race and color. I find Tatum's response to this question, why can't we be colorblind, very helpful. She noted that she had interviewed an African-American father for a study that was focusing on Black youth in predominantly white communities. He was talking about the experiences of his children in school. They were often in a class where they were the only Black child in a mostly white class. He said the teachers would say something, I'm colorblind, I treat all the kids the same. All the children the same. And his response was, the same as what? The same as if they were all white? My children, as the only Black children in the class, are not having the same experience as the white children in that class. The white children are seeing themselves reflected in the school books, in the classroom teacher. My children are sometimes called names that white children don't hear themselves called. Their experience is not the same. So for you to say you're colorblind, that you're treating the children all the same, is to say that you're acknowledging the reality of my child's day-to-day experience. And that feels very invalidating. Equitable treatment is different than equal treatment. Cynthia and Erickson and I, in our article on grace and difference in multicultural education, talk about how a colorblind approach, it reinforces social categories that should be repressed or sidestepped, rather than allowing a social group to rather than allowing information about a social group to increase our understanding of others. So one of the questions we are entertaining today, too, are decentering whiteness. I have a little challenge with that because, when you say decentering whiteness, whiteness is still the target. So let's at least say, I would say we need to do more than that. Reconfiguration, as Jennings has said, is what's needed. Voices that have not been included not only need to be heard, but inform the redesign, implementation, and leadership. So, what are some concrete steps that we might need to consider? First is to acknowledge and address the pathology. Yes, that's a favorite word of a psychologist, or one of our favorite words, but it is the pathology of whiteness. It is pathological. And a willingness to see its many conscious, unconscious manifestations that we all do live out. Racism and whiteness is toxic for everyone, even for those who benefit from it. Second, we need to increase our awareness of the importance of our diverse starting points in evangelicalism. I understand for many the starting point is white evangelical spaces, but mine is not. I went to Howard University, also known as HU. And the evangelical voice that influenced me was Tom Skinner. I was a member of the Christian Fellowship before I became a Christian because I was a good PK, and heard his testimony at one of the meetings, and I accepted Christ after hearing his description of a double life as a gang leader Saturday night and in the church on Sunday. Then the Skinners, Barbara and Tom, came to our fellowship meeting and talked about how their vision, in becoming a Christian, now do I need to be a pastor? Is that the ultimate way to serve Christ? And many of us were wondering about that. No, we had economists, psychologists, engineers, physicians to be in our fellowship. And the goal was, we will reflect the army of God in and through your professions and your personal life. I took that calling. I can remember the place, the physical space where I took on that call. That was my first exposure to an evangelical who was Black and was describing then Black and evangelical approach as well. The way that was formed even more strongly was through the National Black Evangelical Association. That happened, and I didn't know this, was founded in Los Angeles in 1963. And William Bentley was the president, who was a Fuller grad. So I went to that conference, and there's a real understanding of promoting and fostering the dignity of African Americans, but promoting unity and diversity without forced conformity. So I had an opportunity to think about my faith and how it is to live in the context of the United States of America, racism, all of these things, and what the church looks like. So all of those that kind of dialogue was going on for me during the time I was in college. My Christian faith, my culture, and my academic pursuits were not isolated and siloed from one another. They were integrated, and we engaged in rich debates, dialogues, and questioning about the intersectionality among our racial and Christian identities, gender, racism, our academic disciplines, and the church. This was parallel with what I was learning in class. In reading Chancellor Williams' Destruction of Black Civilization, which is available in PDF online. I commend it to everyone. I marveled at the scientific and architectural genius of Black Africans centuries before Christ. I also wondered why nobody in the church or in other previous class had told me about that. I found in that models for my emerging identity as a scientist, but I was also discouraged by the systematic efforts to steal and misrepresent this legacy, which are ongoing, I might add. So my question to you is, what is your starting point? Not what have people told you, what is your starting point in this conversation in terms of your cultural background in the broadest sense of the word, your spiritual journey, your church background? How comfortable are you navigating the key dimensions in addressing these issues, which Elaine Pender-Hughes has talked about, a social worker from Harvard? She talks about we need to understand ethnicity, difference, race, and power. Those are critical dimensions that we need to consider. And then what's the training socialization for your discipline? How well is your discipline engaged these? Are y'all in first grade or maybe trying to get out of middle school? And Bill Pannell, even though I didn't meet Bill before coming here, if I talk about major Black evangelicals, I have to honor Bill Pannell's legacy. And he did work with Tom Skinner in the earlier years, and of course his contributions here. The third step, we need to engage in a conversation, which I'm so glad this is over time. The design of this is really an important approach in a safe enough way that creates spaces for all voices to be heard, not only with the goal of understanding, but with a commitment to change, to have those voices inform the reconfiguration. The process matters. If this was easy, it would have already been done. So, the fourth step is reconfiguration. Lisa Sharon Harper, who has a master's in human rights from Columbia, but also has been leading trainings helping clergy and community address racial justice, asked the question, what will justice require of us as evangelicals? She says, first, we must treat every single human being as created in the image of God. I want to pause. No, really, we need to do that. We know that's a wonderful idea, but we really need to do that. So she breaks it down. When we govern in a way that diminishes or crushes the capacity of people or people groups to exercise stewardship of the world, we are diminishing or crushing the image of God on earth. We are setting ourselves up as enemies of the kingdom of God. Enemies of God. We must decolonize our theology. Now, I can add psychology and mission too, but you hear me. So I would suggest also the fifth step. We need to develop our emotional muscles so that we can tolerate more intense workouts and conversations related to confronting whiteness and racism. These conversations then need to result in not only in how we teach, write, research, engage in ministry, but in changes in our policies, procedures, and ways of relating to one another. Then we must address shame. There are many aspects that this brings up, but shame is particularly important. She notes that, and we have found that in our work as well. Shame prevents us from facing the wrongs we have done, the evil we have complied with and benefited from. Shame tells us it will be better for us if we live in the fantasy of perfection. Shame perpetuates a denial of race. Anything that may activate one's shame then also gets denied. So often, without conscious intent, cross-racial experiences and ideas of people of color may be avoided. The solutions are immediately available. The process of being able to engage with that and all of what that means, that's the harder part, the interpersonal journey. So how do we go forward? Again, Cynthia and I in our article talk about the ability to be loving and not so harsh has to start with ourselves. We want to be honest and open, but let's be even gracious with ourselves. Face the isms, tolerate the challenges to our self-image. Reminder of our common sense sinfulness and God's saving grace. Students of color, as well as faculty, experience racial microaggressions in our lives. That's a regular occurrence. And sometimes that's happening in graduate classrooms, in faculty meetings. They may feel overlooked, ignored, or unseen. Even if you're a tenured professor who's been at Fuller almost 20 years, African-American woman. They frequently have to pick their battles and bear the concern that their honest reactions may be categorized in a stereotyped manner. They may also want to protect their colleagues from guilt or from their anger. This is challenging. We have to extend grace, strength to deal with the conflictual feelings and conflicting feelings and be honest. So finally, how do we engage this? Prayerfully and only possible with the power of the Holy Spirit in us. Create safe enough space, attend to diverse voices, create space for everyone, including their emotions and views, have the ability to contain emotions, speak the truth, but we must then be committed to create and implement change. It does not stop with the sharing of stories. So in this, faith, hope, and love, but the most important is love.